Today in the News Digest. Today marks 4 years as the so-called second in the world Russian army was sent to occupy Kyiv in 3 days. Putin's quote in the beginning of the full-scale invasion has become a meme. The Russian army has lost 400,000 of their soldiers dead and twice as many wounded, achieving an anti-record. Life expectancy of a Russian soldier in Ukraine has decreased to as low as 12 minutes. Putin's economy is in chaos. How much has Russia paid for his war against Ukraine? The war is a terrible, continuous loss. And maybe there is no way for other people to truly understand your loss. Maybe empathy is a gift, or maybe a curse. And it is not enough empathy in our genes as species to prevent another war based on tremendous loss of a previous one. Maybe someday we will learn, or maybe not. Either way today, Ukraine marks a grim anniversary of the most protracted war of the 20th century.
1,462 days of full-scale war, 12 years since the start of Russian aggression, for some, an entire lifetime. Of course, we all want the war to end, but no one will allow Ukraine to end. We want peace, strong, dignified, lasting. Before every round of negotiations, I give our team clear directives. They always come as classified decrees, but I will not reveal any state secret by saying my main message aloud. Do not zero out all these years. Do not devalue all the struggle, courage, dignity, everything Ukraine has gone through. It cannot be surrendered, forgotten, betrayed.
Many things happened within the course of these 1,462 days. Things that nobody thought would ever happen. Nobody thought in the West that war would ever happen in the first place. Western experts were wrong. Putin also thought. He thought that 90% of Ukrainians would be happy to embrace his invasion and would not fight him back. It turned out everyone was wrong. Quoting the major investigation into the matter by The Guardian, it was widely believed that only 1 in 10 Ukrainians would actively resist the invasion. This was a hopelessly optimistic estimate. Still, that considered, even 10% of Ukraine's population amounted to 4 million people. And so the European intelligence services believed that the forces accumulated by Putin were clearly insufficient to combat such resistance. In general, EU intelligence services had all about the same intel, but each country assessed Putin's intentions differently. They mainly believed that the Russians would try to distract the Ukrainians with strikes on Kyiv in order to carry out a limited invasion of Donbas, rather than make a full-scale invasion. They all were wrong.
We didn't believe it would happen because we thought the idea that they would be able to walk into Kyiv and just install a puppet government was completely insane, said one European intelligence official. As it turned out, it was indeed completely insane. The Guardian, citing European official source.
The United States also was convinced in its own version of reality that a full-scale attack was being prepared just to swap power and put someone pro-Russian figure instead of Zelenskyy into the presidential chair in Kyiv. They also were wrong, as it was only half of the plan. The plan of Vladimir Putin was not only militarily seize Donbas and not only to swap political power, it was the destruction of Ukraine's sovereignty as such. And Russian Tsar was also firmly convicted that his army is capable of doing so fast and victorious. And just as back in the early Soviet day, Joseph Stalin rejected any facts that pointed otherwise in what he believed. Moreover, the one who dared to bring such facts up to him would be risking his career and life.
Narishkin had information about Ukraine which did not match what everyone else was saying, but he is weak and indecisive, and Putin wanted to make sure everyone was seen to be part of this decision. So that's why you saw the behavior you saw. The Guardian.
Off camera, there was another startling interaction. Someone named Kozak, Putin's Ukraine point man, had a reputation of a hardliner in Washington, but privately he was horrified by the idea of an invasion, which he only fully realized was in the works on the day of the Kremlin meeting, said a source close to him. Kozak, who had known Putin for decades, was the only person in the room brave enough to speak up, arguing from a strategic rather than a moral point of view. He told the dictator that invading Ukraine would be a disaster, though like most of the elite, he still did not know whether Putin's plan was for limited military action in Donbas or a full-scale war. After the meeting ended, he continued to debate with Putin one-on-one in the large hall, said the source. The millions of Russians watching on television did not get to see any of that. Instead, they heard Putin ask, "Are there any other points of view or special opinions on this matter?" The question was met with silence. Vladimir Putin announced the start of a special military operation at 4:50 a.m. Kiev time on 24th of February 2022. Minutes later, Russia launched a series of missile strikes at targets around the capital. Before dawn broke, Zelenskyy arrived at the presidential compound on Bankova Street, where his first calls with Western leaders were made.
This office, this small room in the bunker on Bankova Street, was where I held my first conversations with world leaders at the beginning of the war. It was here that I spoke with President Biden and heard the words, "Volodymyr, there is a threat. You need to leave Ukraine urgently. We are ready to help with that." And here I replied that I needed weapons, not a ride.
4 years later, the war continues. An estimated at least 400,000 Russian soldiers killed and at least twice as much wounded constitutes well over 1 million Russian dead or wounded, for the prize of controlling just 13% more of Ukraine's territory than at the beginning of 2022. Militarily, socially, politically, it proves undeniable. Putin is failing. First of all, the Russian dictator was dead wrong by building a rigid one-way system that neglects unpleasant facts and favors lies.
The system encourages them to make things sound better than they are. We didn't have a Russian general on the payroll who could say, "I haven't written an honest report in my entire career." The Guardian, citing a U.S. intelligence official.
The Western intelligence failure in Ukraine has started to change the attitudes towards military analysis of the situation amongst Western experts. As one German official put it, the main thing we took away from all of this was that we need to work with worst-case scenarios much more than we did before. And what initially ought to be the worst-case scenario for Ukraine turned out paradoxically into a reason why Ukraine is still standing, moreover gaining its own firepower, long-range capabilities, and most important of all, a nationwide belief in itself.
We fought for it when it seemed that February would never end. We earned our first spring during the Great War. And that was the turning point. For the first time, the thought flashed in everyone's mind, we really can do this. Ukraine can do this. I really like the phrase that everyone reposted back then. A kind of summary of the first phase of the full-scale invasion. When Ukraine said, "You think I've gone down on my knees? Or I've just laced my boots."
So what are the results that full-scale invasion of Ukraine has brought to the Kremlin in general, and its ruler Vladimir Putin in particular? Here is one we can name. Putin's soldiers in Ukraine have a life expectancy of 12 minutes, writes the Sunday Times. Inside the desperate battle for Stepnohirsk, one of the last Ukrainian strongholds protecting the vital city of Zaporizhia, some 20,000 Russian troops have descended on Stepnohirsk, intent on forging a path north towards the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia. That is 14 miles away. An industrial hub and home to the largest steelworks left in Ukrainian hands, the city is vital to the country's war effort. There, as per military experts, the life of a Russian soldier lasts no longer than 12 minutes. Vladimir Putin has fallen into a trap of his own making, according to a recent report by The Economist. The publication argues that the Russian leader can neither abandon the war against Ukraine nor afford the steadily rising costs of continuing it. Even if a peace agreement were struck, the internal fallout would threaten Russia with deep economic and political instability. Analysts suggest the dictator's hesitation toward a potential deal stems from fears that peace itself could trigger a domestic crisis. The massive diversion of resources to fund the invasion has left other sectors of the Russian economy in decay, and any attempt to reallocate those funds in a post-war environment would plunge the nation into a severe recession. That's it for today's News Digest. Thanks for staying informed with us. If you found this update useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.